Zelensky embezzled $400 million of American aid. The Ukrainian government is terrorists who kill civilians. Where are these headlines coming from? Maybe it's Russia Today or the Sputnik News Agency. No, such headlines are now on Twitter of the Libertarian Party of the USA and its younger brother, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, which is periodically retweeted by the main account. New Hampshire has its own atmosphere. There Zelensky is compared to Hitler, Ukraine with the Third Reich, where Russians are persecuted instead of Jews. It would be understandable if American libertarians today spoke from a position of isolationism. They say, in a coffin we have seen these showdowns on the other side of the world, our hut on the edge in Alabama. However, these guys literally retell the current Kremlin propaganda word for word. At the same time, they also call on the American government to stop supporting Taiwan and write that everything is not so clear with the Uyghurs in China. Such support for the two largest autocracies on the planet is not exactly what you expect from representatives of an ideology that puts freedom at the forefront. And many people are surprised by this. Many. But not me. Last year, people from the Mises caucus or the Mises faction were elected to the leadership of the SLP. These are conservative libertarians, or as they are also called, paleolibertarians. For those who have followed them before, these statements did not come as a surprise. Take Lee Rockwell's website, one of the oldest publications of paleolibertarians. In March last year, an article appeared there about how the West provoked Putin. At the same time, the text titled, "Why Does the West Hate Putin?" Because Putin is a real people's politician who stands for traditional values against migration and globalism. But the article is especially good, exposing some myths about the war in Ukraine, where Rockwell broadcasts literally all the myths created by Kremlin propaganda. This licking of the Kremlin walls did not begin yesterday. Back in the 16th year, it was possible to read there how Putin raised Russia from its knees. And most importantly, above all this is the motto, against the state, against the war, for the market. How did it happen that under such slogans, they glorify tyranny? To figure this out, we'll have to go back about 50 years. So make yourself comfortable, stock up on popcorn. You will find a long story about how libertarians fell in love with Putin. In 1992, the economist and libertarian Murray Rothbard wrote a pamphlet called Right-Wing Populism. He began with words of support for David Duke, the representative of the Republican Party in the Louisiana Parliament, who was then attacked by a variety of people. What are you fighting for? Before entering politics, David Duke was the Grand Master of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan for almost 10 years. Then, he tried his hand at the Democratic Party, but things didn't go well there, and Duke switched to the Republican Party. Even after leaving the Klan, Duke liked to talk about the benefits of racial segregation, as well as release a couple of pins to the Zionist lobby. Raj came from a family of Jewish immigrants who came to the United States from Poland in the early 20th century. His teacher, economist Ludwig von Mises, was also a Jew who fled to the USA from the Nazis. Against this background, an alliance with David Duke might seem a little unexpected. However, Rothbard wrote that there was nothing in Duke's program that libertarians could not support. Tax cuts, the abolition of bureaucracy, and the welfare state, the abolition of positive discrimination, in order to ensure equal rights for everyone, including whites. What's wrong with that? It may seem that this union was purely technical in nature. They say, if racists and anti-Semites still oppose the big state today, then why not go part of the way with them? However, if you carefully read the manifesto, it turns out that Rothbard offered something much deeper there than a technical union. But to understand this, we must first understand how he came to such an alliance. And to do this, immerse yourself in the history of the libertarian movement in the United States, which I will reproduce mainly in 3 books. Links to them, as usual, in the description. If you suddenly found yourself in 19th century Europe and started calling yourself a libertarian, and few who were familiar with this word would attribute you to anarchists, such as, for example, the Frenchman Joseph de Jacques, who was the first to use the word libertarianism. By the end of the 19th century, the word had reached the United States. There he was raised to the banner by individualist anarchists like Benjamin Tucker. By the beginning of the 20th century, the concept of libertarian was already being used more widely as the antithesis of everything authoritarian. However, the word itself was not particularly common. Apologists of the free market and private property were then more often called liberals. The word libertarianism began to gain popularity after the Second World War, thanks to Leonard Read, the creator of an organization called Economic Education, abbreviated in PIE. In the 55th year, an article entitled "Who Are the Libertarians?" appeared in the magazine Z Freeman, published by this organization. Author Gene Russell complained that the word liberal was appropriated by the left, all sorts of fans of the New Deal. Therefore, all supporters of real freedom should now be called by another word, the word libertarians. PIE tried to create a single platform for different famous people. Ayn Rand, Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises and others. All of them promoted the idea of a free market, although with very different justifications. However, not all of them sought to be called libertarians. So, Ayn Rand promoted her own philosophy called objectivism and complained that libertarians were stealing her ideas. Hayek recognized that libertarianism had become a new name for classical liberalism, but he still preferred to distance himself and call himself an old Whig. It is PIE that is responsible for popularizing the word libertarianism in the modern sense, denoting supporters of the free market, private property, and minimal state intervention. Libertarianism has not historically been associated with conservatism. It was associated with anarchism, and then with classical liberalism. But libertarians and conservatives of the United States during the Cold War had common enemies. This is the USSR with the ideology of communism, as well as supporters of state regulation within the states themselves. However, the situational alliance of libertarians with conservatives turned out to be fragile. In the 60th year, the Young Americans for Freedom organization was created, and in the 69th, one libertarian burned a summons during a rally. The conservative public did not tolerate such sacrilege. The case ended with the expulsion of libertarians and anarchists from the Union. Then, in the 71st, they created their own Libertarian Party. Murray Rothbard began his career as a libertarian in the 50s, having come to the same VP. Then he worked at the William Fokker Foundation, where his task was to translate the ideas of his teacher, Ludwig von Mises, into understandable human language. At the same time, in the 50s, Rothbard was a member of Ayn Rand's circle, but did not agree with her views. In the 60s, Rothbard already acts as an independent figure, not only as an economist of the Austrian school, but also as a philosopher who undertook to revive a forgotten, it was natural, legal tradition, instead of the most popular utilitarian rhetoric at that time. Interestingly, it was Robert who unearthed the anarchic roots of American libertarianism, shaking off authors such as Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker. Rothbard's ideal was anarcho-capitalism, that is, the complete abolition of the state, and the transfer of all its functions to private individuals. In his works, he described in detail what a social order could look like without a state. The notorious courts under a cap are from there. Rothbard wrote a lot and got the nickname Mr. Libertarian for his activity. But now Rothbard's views are more important to us, not on theory, but on political practice. And here, Rothbard had one unexpected idol. This is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Back in '61, Rothbard wrote a confidential paper for the Fokker Foundation on libertarian political strategy. It was called What to Do, a reference to the corresponding pamphlet by Lenin, from whom Rothbard offered to learn how to make a revolution. Only by revolution, Rothbard meant not an armed seizure of power, but the spread of libertarian ideology. Let me remind you that unlike other Marxists, Lenin did not rely on the working classes, but on a narrow group of professional revolutionaries. Rothbard viewed libertarian intellectuals as something similar, a group of hardcore revolutionaries. He offered to learn from Lenin the main thing, how to maintain the right ideological line in his ranks. To do this, it is necessary to adopt Lenin's practice of fighting left-wing deviators and right-wing opportunists. Deviators are those who are excessively carried away by ideological purity to the detriment of political pragmatism. Opportunists, those who, on the contrary, are too ready to compromise, forgetting about the fundamental principles. In the book To a New Freedom, first published in the 73rd, Rothbard repeated all the same theses about the need to fight deviationism and opportunism. However, without references to Lenin, with references to vague Marxists. In the same book, Rothbard discussed which social groups are allies of libertarianism. And he wrote that big business does not apply to them. On the contrary, he tends towards an alliance with the state. But this did not prevent Rothbard from cooperating with Charles Koch, the heir to the Koch Industries Corporation. Charles' father, American engineer Fred Combe, once created the largest oil refining company from scratch. He also managed to visit the Stalinist USSR, where he built oil refineries. He returned from there a staunch anti-communist. Since then, the Koch family has supported any pro-market movements in the United States, ranging from conservatives to libertarians. By the mid-70s, Ho had already sponsored a number of libertarian organizations, as a result of which some libertarians treated him as a walking wallet, while others considered him a kind of octopus, who launched his tentacles into the libertarian movement. And even a special word was invented for this kotopus. The authorship belongs to the anarchist Sam Buchanan. In the 77th year, Robert Koch and the then-famous libertarian politician Ed Crane created the Cato Institute, the first libertarian think tank. Koch, as usual, became a purse, and Rothbard became an ideological father. He also suggested the name itself, a reference to the famous letters of Cato. In the same year, Rothbard writes another secret libertarian strategy. This time for the Cato Institute, and already for as many as 178 pages. There he again started his favorite hurdy-gurdy about the need to learn from Lenin. But then another example was added to follow. And this, I'm sorry, is Hitler, who delighted Rothbard by carrying one main idea through his entire political life. Here, of course, the main thing is not to specify which one. In addition to the principle of my honor is called loyalty, Rothbard offered to learn populist rhetoric from the Nazis with the communists. They say that it is necessary to broadcast to the public a simple and understandable picture of the world divided into good and bad guys. In general, this is, as they say, the base. Rothbard also paid much attention to the importance of political hierarchy. He wrote that the revolutionary structure should resemble a pyramid, again, as it was with Hitler, Lenin, and other successful personalities. Thus, Rothbard saw the Cato Institute as a kind of closed order that monitors the ideological frequency of libertarians and unsubscribes from the movement of opportunists with deviators. However, 4 years later, at 80, the unexpected happens. Rothbard himself is being unsubscribed from the Dviz. To be fair, Rothbard's exclusion from the Cato Institute does seem to have been executed in an ugly way. There were 4 members of the Institute's board at that time, including Rothbard, Koch, and Crane. Each of the 4 had 12 symbolic $1 shares. One could be excluded only by the decision of the other 3. Rothbard claimed that he was not even notified of the shareholders' meeting, as it was supposed to be, but only informed after the fact of the decision taken, and his shares, which were in storage, were simply squeezed out. I wonder if anyone was joking then that Rothbard should have gone to court under NCAP. If not, I'll be the first. Also, to be fair, Rothbard's objection was then published in a libertarian newspaper, formerly part of Kotopus. Why did they unsubscribe Rothbard? It seems that he just got everyone with his struggle for Leninist purity. So Rothbard saw opportunism in the fact that the Institute hired an economist who was a representative of a non-Austrian Chicago school. But the main conflict unfolded during the presidential campaign of the 80th year. The libertarian candidate then was Ed Clark. Ed Crane, Rothbard's colleague at the Cato Institute, recommended that he make the program more moderate in order to attract more votes. Rothbard attacked the opportunists Clark and Crane. A separate part of the accusation was that, contrary to his methodology, they did not draw a clear image of the bad guys, and did not promise voters that if the libertarians won, the vicious American elites would lose their criminal profits. It is important to clarify that it was not about some kind of backstage showdown. Rothbard attacked his colleagues publicly from the pages of his newspaper Libertarian Forum. He wasn't shy in his expressions either. For example, he said that his colleagues sold their souls for vegetable soup, but they didn't even get soup. Said really well. After the expulsion, Rothbard accused Koch of authoritarianism and anathematized all libertarians of the Koch right. According to various testimonies, Charles Koch really sought to run the institute rigidly as his own corporation, which, however, could be expected from a man who turned his father's millions into billions, made his company the second in the United States, and then also defeated his own brothers in the struggle for inheritance. Fred Koch generally raised his 4 sons in a spirit of fierce competition. As children, they sorted out their relationship with the help of a pair of boxing gloves, which were given to them by their father. Himself a former boxer, even a very nice video from the family archive has been preserved. That's who Rothbard has been bothering with his whims for 4 years, and even for his own money. But the rest of what happened to the Rothbard is described by the words what he fought for. That's what he ran into. Americans also have a good saying on this score about a person who voted for the Leopard Party, a Lyceum student. I didn't think they would eat my face. So did Robert. He wanted ideological purges. Apparently he thought that he himself would decide who was a deviant and who was an opportunist. Well, in the end, I got myself cleaned up. He praised the hierarchical ladder, and he himself was lowered down it. It's funny that although Robert cited the example of the Bolsheviks and the Nazis, the fate of the old Bolshevik Guard and the assault troops of the ISA did not teach him anything. What happened next? Then, Robert found new associates in the person of Lew Rockville, an aide to Congressman Ron Paul. Together, they founded the Misier Institut News Tech to promote proper libertarianism and expose Topis. These pseudo-libertarians, the litter of the establishment, the corrupt servants of corrupt elites. By the way, no Katopis pays me for these stories, so don't forget to subscribe to Boost and Patreon. Together with Rockwell, Robert opened a new magazine, which has now become the very site of Lew Rockwell, where Putin is licked. After the Great Libertarian Divorce, the Cato Institute, the FI and other libertarian mainstream found themselves on one side, on the other. Their critics are from the Mises Institute, and the Libertarian Party of the USA is something like the child of divorced parents. More often he lives with a rich dad, but sometimes he is drawn to a mentally unstable mother, because warm childhood memories are associated with her. If back in the 60s, Rothbard selected a tactical alliance with the new leftists and feminists, then having entered into an alliance with the conservative Catholic Rockwell, he began to promote the so-called paleo-libertarianism, to restore the union of libertarians and conservatives. What is the essence of this paleo approach? The essence can be found in an article in defense of paleo-libertarianism of the 90s, in which Rockwell swore at egalitarian hippies from the Libertarian Party and argued that it was necessary to defend objective moral values, especially Judeo-Christian ones, and in the confrontation with the state, rely on the family, the church, and the community. In other words, from the point of view of paleo-libertarianism, a libertarian can no longer simply be a conservative of his own choice. He must be one now. Why did Rothbard adopt this paleo-libertarian creed? Here we can recall that Rothbard admired the populism of Lenin and Hitler. He had another hero, Senator Joe McCarthy. In the book Betrayals of the American Right, Rothbard admired his ability to address the people directly, through the heads of the party establishment, the mass media, and liberal intellectuals. Apparently, after the break with Koch, Rothbard finally became disillusioned with the approach involving an appeal to the elites, and finally confirmed that libertarianism should be an order of guardians of the ideal, but at the same time rely on populist rhetoric. Rothbard was trying, as he himself said, to reach out to the rednecks. But isn't there a contradiction here? Isn't there a risk of slipping into that very opportunism and losing your ideas just in pursuit of popular rhetoric? Now we can finally return to the manifesto of right-wing populism from the 92nd year, where Rothbard defended the Grand Master of the Order of the White Caps. In the same place, he outlined an 8-point program of the right of populism. The first 3, tax cuts, the abolition of the welfare state, and positive discrimination programs, are the usual libertarian agenda. But then an interesting one begins. In the 4th point, Rothbard demands to crush street crime. The idea is also good, but the method that Rothbard proposed is to give the police the authority to carry out punishment on the spot. And it wasn't about private MAC policing in an ideal anarcho-capitalist world. Rothbard proposed to issue emergency powers to the state policeman. Make him a kind of dread judge. The current American militarized police, which shoots first and then asks questions, is perhaps close to Rothbard's aspirations. The next point is even more fun. Rothbard proposed to unleash this dread judge not only on robbers, bandits, but also on vagrants and homeless people. They say they should disappear from our streets, but where? This is their problem. And again, we are not talking about any private streets under ANCAP, but just about ordinary streets of that time. Considering this cannibalistic manifesto, it's hard not to be surprised at how Rothbard lost himself in the pursuit of populism. Under the slogans of the struggle for freedom, he began to demand literally the strengthening of state arbitrariness. In the end, Rothbard adds that all of these points are fully compatible with the hardcore libertarian position, and also that it is necessary to compromise with conservatives on pornography, prostitution, and abortion. Interestingly, 10 years before that, Rothbard himself defended the right to abortion in the book Ethics of Freedom, albeit with a very peculiar argument. They say that the embryo can be considered an aggressor, and the abortion itself is such a form of self-defense. But now, in order to please the precious rednecks, Rothbard was already ready to decentralize the issue, that is, to give the local state authorities the opportunity to prohibit women from defending themselves in his own understanding. And of course, this whole manifesto is full of curses against the corrupt elites, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, who insidiously deceive the ordinary American people. Even in Rothbard's early political strategy, I was struck by the fact that he viewed the methods of party building of communists and Nazis as some kind of ethical neutral tools, like a gun that does evil in bad hands and good in good hands. But in fact, the methods of political struggle are derived from the worldview of their bearers. Ideological purges, rigid party hierarchy. Communists and Nazis wanted to see the whole world the same way. The world of ideological hegemony, centralized allocation of resources. The libertarian ideal looks different. This is a world where everyone can be free. Therefore, libertarian political methods must be different. The libertarian political agenda should be formed in the course of free discussion, and not through hysterical accusations of opportunism and deviance. Paradoxically, in pursuit of ideological purity, Rothbard sacrificed it. By adopting the political methods of ideological enemies, he allowed them to take deep roots in his soul. Starting with the approval of the NSDAP party building, he came to the approval of the assault detachments, assault squads to fight the homeless. This finale of Rothbard's ideological path can be summed up with a Shakespearean phrase, "Violent feelings have a violent end." However, I don't want to demonize Rothbard too much. Now, some are trying to expose Rothbard as the father of right-wing populism. He writes that he almost gave birth to Trump, as Isaac gave birth to Jacob. But it is worth remembering his useful contribution. Rothbard revived the natural law doctrine and revived the old American anarchism. And only then did he stumble over political practice, plunged into opportunism in order to please redneck. Therefore, we libertarians should perceive Rothbard as a kind of grandfather who in his youth was a wahoo and then got involved with a bad company started drinking, and in old age fell into insanity, began to walk under himself and complain about the conspiracy of reptilians. And here is one famous student of Rothbard. This is a completely different matter. There can be no tolerance towards Democrats and communists in a libertarian social order. They must be physically separated and excluded from society.